So, but this is extremely important. And first of all, as part of the dialogue, cultural immersion is very much embedded, has to be, otherwise we might as well have done it on campus. And in our case, of course, the content and the culture are deeply integrated as well. So thank you for being here. In terms of the presentation itself, the recording is happening from there, so please stand on this side, then you are not blocking anything. Are all of you comfortable that she has your presentations? Yes, all of you? Yes? You have all the presentations? Okay.
The first group, students with ancient time period, yeah, just send in your presentation so that I have those 8 and we can smoothly go through the ancient period first.
What else? What else do you not have?
I'm receiving the presentations one by one.
Okay.
But I want the ancient one first because they'll go first.
Okay. While that is going on, if you have your phone and WhatsApp, Professor Udit Bhatia send an interesting ecological video. You don't have to watch it, it's not bad. If you happen to have some interesting videos like that, you can send it along. This video is titled Nature Read into the Law. While you come from there for your presentation, please be a bit careful, you know, about that.
James, can you read?
I'm sending you a link right now.
Can you hear? Oh, so I have to speak that loud? Is there a mic? No, right? Prabodh, is there a mic?
Just micro.
All right, this is good. I feel so empowered.
Ava, I just don't have yours.
I mean, I'm gonna send it.
I have this inflated view of self.
Did the file download from my own work? That's not really.
Yes.
This is a video that doesn't work on Google Slides.
It's okay.
On your birthday too?
Yeah, no, I'm fine. Cool, bro.
That's what they all say.
Yeah.
Are you okay?
This is
You
two.
with email?
This is the second thing?
What is it?
Second person.
Yes.
Then swipe up, like the first
Can you
one.
do this for me?
Like if you could download that one and
That
open it
one?
in PowerPoint, that would be better, but it's okay if you can't. It's got a video.
Alright.
It's probably not even gonna work out right about this.
You're right.
Professor, can you record a video really quick? Let me ask you. Can you just do the same thing, record a video?
Just one second. Yeah, I'll do that. Just one second. I need to have my face in that chair. Not sure if all of you are coming this way.
I love it.
All right. On public demand, the video is on.
Okay, of course. So I think everyone, we know it's a very special occasion today. So if we could, happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Dion. Happy birthday to you.
Thank you, guy. Oh my god. I want to cry.
Speech?
Speechless. Okay. Guys, thank you for being so nice. It makes our lives more easier in 1,000 ways. Thank you, never enough thank you for your kindness and your very nice attitude.
Yeah, we can start with the ancient period. So, Avril, James, Sarah, Augusta, Sylvia, Lizzie, Alan, and Ava. We'll start with you.
We all.
No, not all together.
Okay.
One
I was like,
Be a bit careful about this. That mic?
I use the mic. I use the mic.
Is it recorded?
Yes.
Okay.
Now let's go.
Is that on?
Yeah. Okay. Hi everyone. To kick off our discussions on Thai culture and its history, I'm going to talk about some of the earliest depictions of art, including cave paintings, pottery, Buddhist art, tools, and other artifacts. I would like to preface that since the first time period we're looking at is prehistoric, there is limited information on some of these artifacts, but taking a look at the art that was used during this time still serves as a great supplement to our growing knowledge of the way that these earliest civilizations lived. Next slide, please. Okay, so we'll begin with cave paintings. We won't dive too deep into this one because the meanings behind these paintings are not yet confirmed, but there were often scenes of figures performing daily activities such as hunting, gathering, herding, and more. If you're interested in this cave art, you can actually visit them at many of Thailand's national parks though. Okay, so now we'll talk about something that has a little bit more information, which is pottery. Pottery is one of the most prominent forms of art in Thai's history, which is prehistoric. And we'll talk about where that comes from first, which is Ban Chiang. Ban Chiang is a prehistoric settlement that is located in modern-day Udon Thani province, which is in the northeast region of Thailand. It was discovered originally in the 1950s and was originally inhabited by the Phuan people of Laos. Found at this site are artifacts that date back to over 4,000 BCE, and this was confirmed through a method called thermoluminescence. I would like to highlight that in the 70s through the 90s, the US actually stole over 10,000 of these artifacts, and since then the US government has taken action to make sure that those have been returned back to Thai people. This site was designated as a World Heritage Site in 1992, making it one of the most significant prehistoric settlements in the world. What this means is studying this site serves importance to everyone, and that's because it gives us a lot of information about early civilizations just in general, not just Thai culture. This is where wet rice agriculture started, and also the first signs of domesticated farming and also bronze tool making. So there's three main elements of Ban Chiang pottery. This is all earthenware, so that means they are shaped by clay and they're all made by hand, and they are they're like developed in low temperatures in open kilns, but not all the way, so that when they're done, they're like still porous. That makes it easy for the people that were making this art to then paint on it, and they have this distinct red pattern that they always put on it, and it carries motifs such as spirals, circles, zigzags, and sometimes animals or plants. And the main function of these pots are storage, cooking, and other ceremonial purposes. Next slide. So now you can see what they look like. They're very beautiful. The red pattern is dubbed as the Ban Chiang rope, so it is like what it's known for. This is a very signature aspect of this type of pottery. On the right are some other pieces that were from this time that aren't necessarily pottery. So we have some things here, and on the bottom I just wanted to make note that that's a ceramic roller and also a spindle whorl, which just shows the use of textiles in the earliest times. Okay, so we're going to talk about Buddhist art now, but I want to highlight two important influences during this time period, and that would be and I'm so sorry for pronunciation, but the Dwaravati kingdom and also the Srivijaya Empire. So the Dwaravati was a early Mon kingdom. It was inspired by the Gupta Empire in India. At this time, you will see that the depictions of Buddha to be simple and graceful, and they also had Dharma chakras, which are the wheel of law in Buddhism. In the Srivijaya Empire, That is located in present-day Indonesia and Malaysia. It also was a major center for Mahayana Buddhism, and they specifically highlighted I'm so sorry, which is not Buddha, but enlightened beings who pause their own enlightenment to help others. And for the next slide, you can see what these kind of look like. So the Wheel of Law is the first depiction. I tried to put them kind of in order of like the centuries, as you can see. And so we have the standing Buddha in the Manipurvati period, and then this is I can't pronounce it. It's not Buddha. This is a bust of a enlightened being that helps others become enlightened. And then this is a statue of Buddha in the what I found to be the most recent century up until the next time period. Okay, next one. And then right here, I'm just highlighting some Bronze Age artifacts, which are like tools and other things that they use. And a lot of these items are made of copper alloy. On the left, you can see chisels, bells, arrowheads, anklets, and axes they use. In the middle, on the top, is a spearhead. On the bottom is going to be a bracelet with bells, and then over here it's an adze. That's an axe, and then a sandstone mold, which was used to make that tool. But yeah, that's it. Next person, I don't want to like this again. Put it back.
Testing. I don't have to use that. I don't think I want to. Okay, so similar to Alvaro said, I think the period before the 13th century, there's a bit limited pictures out there, but I'll do my best to give you a comprehensive overview of architecture in Thailand before the 13th century. Starting off with your History 101, the architectural history in Thailand is really rooted on the various civilizations that have existed throughout the Chao Phraya River. So again, if we can sort of visualize the river as coming up about this way, there's multiple different kingdoms that interacted with this space. And architecturally, please excuse me for the pronunciation, the Savarati era into the Angkor era are the two sort of major architectural influences in Thailand before this 13th century, as well as a little bit of some Indian influence as well that we'll get into. You can see some architectural styles right here, as well as some materials that are used in the construction of some of these earliest buildings. If we could do the next slide, please. Now, brick is probably one of the most commonly used materials, particularly in the Thai architecture, known for constructing the walls, providing stability. And then I'd say wood and stucco are also major materials that were used early on before the introduction of some more complex material ingredients. And then some of the earliest elements of Thai civilization are exemplified by a diverse array of monumental structures. So in the buildings themselves, you really get to see a presentation of not just architecture, but also the culture that inspired it. Chiang Mai is revered as one of the most sacred Buddhist temples in Thailand, and as you can see right here, these buildings you might have even seen in some later presentations today, but many of the time construction was started prior to the 13th century, and temples have been worked on since. Okay, moving on to influences of external kingdoms in architecture, a significant difference between Thai and Khmer prangs. So the prangs are the tall structures that we see here, are the materials that were used. So the Khmers used sandstone and laterite, which are very abundant. However, the Thai prangs tended to use more bricks. I really wanted to include this picture here, just to kind of show that even though a building could have been built in one architectural style, just like I mentioned previously, over time buildings in Thailand really seem to have evolved. So this Wat Mahathat in Ratchaburi was originally Khmer, and then rebuilt a lot later in the Ayutthaya Thai style. And you hit play again. This is, I think, it might work a little video. Anyway, this is Angkor Wat, which is in Cambodia, but formerly in the territory that would have been Thailand. And we can see again the prangs that were made using sandstone. Now, continuing on with the same topic, Indian influences were also very influential. Specifically with sculptural motifs and religious iconography. So these two are both pictures from Angkor Wat, and you can see just sort of how detailed some of these motifs and iconography are. So contrasting the ancient times here, materials and forms in Thai architecture, we can really get some insights into the unique cultural identities and environmental influences shaping each tradition. Like I said in the last slide, the use of symbols and iconography really showcases more than just the materials that were used, but really the culture that played such a crucial part in shaping the final design. I thought it was important to include this picture over here, which is about 10 or 15 miles outside of Angkor Wat from the sky, sort of showing the landscape. I think we all know this to be a very hot region, so of course all of the buildings that were constructed had to take their own unique environmental factors into account. So you might recognize this flower right here to be the lotus. The lotus sort of is used to influence many of the prangs throughout multiple architectural styles. And architecture transcends more than just aesthetics, embodying profound symbolic meanings that reflect the country's spiritual beliefs. So again, the lotus is related to that. And then of course mythical creatures and other religious icons are represented like we saw in the last slide. So, beyond aesthetics, Thai architecture, I'd say, serves as a medium for conveying power, authority, social hierarchy, and political legitimacy in their ancient empire. I think Thailand was a major empire, and sometimes from the Western perspective we forget just what a dominant force existed in this part of the world. And really the intricate interplay between function and form in architecture reflects such a dynamic culture influenced by so many different kingdoms existing in this land in quite a relatively small space, and that is something embodied throughout. Finally, I believe, I'll show you this one picture over here, which is one of the oldest things I could find. So this is an inscription at Angkor Wat, so again the 12th century. And they were believed to have come from the Altai mountain range in southern Mongolia, and really just showcase again that the materials can come from a pretty far place but relatively local in the region, and you can sort of see faces here as well. I think they've done a really good job with limited materials and sort of limited access in a really hot environment to create some beautiful structures that are still standing today. Thank you so much.
Okay, hello guys. I'm going to be talking about the ancient science, technology, and medicine in Thailand. So this is just going into some general research. So starting with medicine, ancient Thai medicine has a lot of roots in Indian civilization and are particularly influenced by Hindu Ayurvedic practices. So a lot of like religious healing traditions there, and that also plays in with Buddhism. Buddhism plays a central role in shaping Thai medicine, especially with like monks serving as healers. And I thought it was interesting to flash forward kind of now. There is like legislation that protects and promotes this Thai traditional medicine, and it definitely has like a blend of a lot of cultural, religious like influences. And then going into more like technology, Thai civilizations were really into maritime trade with the maritime Silk Roads, and that included then the development of like advanced ports and coastal settlements, and also facilitated like a lot of sharing of knowledge between other civilizations. And there was also like bronze drums and glass beads found during that time. And then focusing on architecture a little bit, there was like impressive structures being built, including temples, palaces, and irrigation systems, showing their like engineering techniques, especially with the Khmer Empire and the Dravidian culture. And then lastly, we have like metalworking and crafts. It was interesting in that like thousands of years ago, actually it's found more recently, like in the 1900s, that they possibly are the world's oldest socketed tool. So indicating that like during the Bronze Era, it was definitely prominent in Thai culture. And then focusing on science a little bit. For astronomy, they definitely were influenced by Indian and Chinese astronomical knowledge, and they developed their own systems for tracking events, and that was typically for like tracking religious events and activities in agricultural planning. And then going to the agricultural, they were heavy in rice cultivation, and they used methods such as flood-based irrigation and terracing, and these techniques like demonstrated a deep understanding of the weather patterns and understanding like monsoon season and how to like make sustainable food production. And then going into influences, I would say like an overall theme is definitely like Buddhism is heavily involved in all the like medicine, science, and technology. Medicine under King Jaravarman, excuse my pronunciation, he built like a lot of hospitals, which is kind of the first like flood of hospitals, and then he would like write these like instructions or like medicines on these tablets that would be put outside hospitals. And then I thought it was also interesting that like traditional medicine practitioners held like very high societal roles. And then in technology, we had like obviously Buddhism influence of like constructing all of these like temples and monasteries. And then there was, again, with the maritime Silk Road, a lot of like interaction with like external kingdoms and powers, which definitely facilitated the exchange of ideas. And then with science, again, talking about the cultivation of rice, it was influenced by the Khmer culture because this rice that began with like being served to the ruling class before it transitioned to become food. And then the Thai kings definitely supported agriculture and like would give granted like lands and farms to those people. And then just like a little bit about my perspective, I just think it's interesting how like heavily involved their really like spirituality and the practical application of medicine is here. And that's something we don't see as much in Western society. I think it's definitely more focused on like the sciencey aspects of medicine. But here they're still like giving out like herbals, and I know some of us have gotten like Thai massages. And then yeah, I think again just like how it's very integrated into their like healthcare system and different science and technology that they use here.
Is this yours?
No, mine's that.
Oh, this one.
I can also send it as like.
No,
okay,
no,
actually, this works. Thank you. So yeah, I did ancient intellectual history, and I simplified a lot of like the ancient philosophy. So I apologize in advance if like I did that poorly. So these are like kind of like the four main philosophies that were present in Thailand when it's different empires ruling over different areas. The first being Buddhism. There was different sects of Buddhism in different areas, but basically the basics of Buddhism. I don't know if they're the basics, but the things I came up with are the Four Noble Truths, which basically are just how to manage suffering, and then karma as well, which just is not like technically how we talk about it, I think, in our vernacular, but it's more like your good actions lead to happiness and your bad actions lead to unhappiness. And then they believe in the cycle of rebirth. Hinduism, very similarly, also believes in rebirth, but they believe in a divine presence in all existences. And then they have four life goals: dharma, artha, karma, and moksha. And they acknowledge potential truth in other religions, which I think is important when considering how Buddhism spread. And then we have Brahmanism. This was really vague. Brahmanism and animism. That was like what the original Thai people believed when Buddhism was introduced. So Brahmanism is kind of where Hinduism stems from. It's a concept related to a supreme god. And then animism is kind of similar to what like North American indigenous people believe, that like all objects, including like lakes and rocks and animals, they share like a similar breath of life. And here's like a really, really simplified timeline. Basically, in the 3rd century is when it was introduced into the area now considered Thailand during the rule of the Emperor Ashoka of India. And this was like at the time, like I said earlier, that Thai people believed in Brahmanism mixed with animism. And then earliest archaeological, okay, that's not the word, was in 5th to 7th century BCE. This is basically like the first stupas and temples were found. And then in the 9th to 13th century BCE is when like the Khmer rule was kind of taking over Thailand more, and so you see more Hinduism and Mayanism. But there's some temples erected during this time that you can still see in Thailand. Okay, so Theravada Buddhism is like the state religion here, so the main philosophy that was believed. So this is kind of how it spread around because there were different sects of Buddhism at the time. So the first, obviously, like I said earlier, but then the Khmer Empire also came into Thailand and they controlled the northeastern and central Thailand. They believed in Mahayana Buddhists. So this is basically kind of mixed with Brahmanism, so kind of Hinduism like as well. And these two philosophies can be seen in the Thai language and culture, where you see like the Sanskrit and stuff like that. And it was introduced by the kings of Srivijaya, as well as the southern provinces. So that's where kind of you can see it geographically. And then there was another like subsect of this Theravada Buddhism called Hinayana Buddhism, which was prevalent near Burma. And then Theravada Buddhism is what Thais at the time were practicing, and they had settled in Suvarna Bhumi and had made contact with both of the other types of Buddhism, but they took over the country after one of the kingdoms broke up and the other one declined. So this is just kind of like, I wanted to like kind of look into like how they differ from one another. So Mahayana Buddhism, they basically strive to reach Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings. So they believe in Sunyata, which is like the concept of like emptiness. They believe like all phenomena are empty of inherent existence. And then we have Theravada Buddhism, which is basically a personal liberation through one's efforts and like aiming for nirvana and ending the cycle of rebirth. And there's a big focus on like mindfulness and concentration. And then obviously the bottom one is a subsect of Theravada, but it's really similar. But it basically just integrated whatever the local practices of the like region were at the time, and included some like pre-Buddhist like animist beliefs as well. And I also want to mention like one thing worth noting is Buddhism was so easy to spread around because what the Thai people already believed, it like basically directly aligned, but it brought some like additional freedoms to the people who lived there. So it was really easy for them to, it wasn't like it was forced upon them. It was something they really accepted and were open to, and I think that speaks a lot about the people and the culture here. And I guess my personal perspective would be like we talk a lot about how like Thailand's never been colonized, and I think like earlier it shows like it's not like they went to war with these other philosophies that were around them. They kind of just like the other ones failed, and so they reigned up dominant. But that's because I think it's also because Buddhism is such a unifying philosophy, and I think it played a role in uniting the Thai people and allowed them to like maintain a fair amount of internal stability. And I think it also allowed them to have a strong moral foundation, prevent social harmony and such. Yeah, I think that's.
So I had the ancient history of the economy, and as we said before, like not much has been directly written down about the economy during this time, so it's best to analyze the different kingdoms and cultures during that time to get an understanding of how their economy was run. So first, the Ban Tiong culture was, as we heard, in the northeast of what is present-day Thailand. And this is significant because it has an archaeological site, which we have found pottery and metal tools, which signifies that there was barter and trade during this time, as well as specialization in the industry, so people knew how to make these tools. Secondly, we have the Marathi kingdom, which is more in like centralized Thailand. Of today's Thailand. And this was a very significant time for the economy as there was major expansion. There was international trade with China and India and other neighboring countries. So more foreign goods were starting to enter the area, like beads, religious artifacts, etc. And then also, as we've heard about, the religion, Buddhism religion grew during this time. So there was the construction of monasteries, increased pilgrimage. There were people that they needed to make these temples. There was increased trade, and then more relations with other nations that had the Buddhism religion. There were also like neighboring influences. The Funan Kingdom, which is now in present-day Vietnam, along the Mekong Delta, was significant due to the maritime trading and ease of trading things along rivers, as well as the Khmer Kingdom in what's present-day Cambodia.
They were significant because they had the complex irrigation, allowing their economy to thrive during the time. More infrastructure also means more jobs for different peoples, and then more trade as well. And then also, like, sort of to sum up of what we're talking, the location of Thailand is significant as it's near the ocean as well as the river and other large economies like China and India, so it was in a good location for more trade. And I guess like the overall takeaway from this is that the economy and industry were really shaped by the region and the interactions it had and other political powers, and it's really like the blend of all those different relationships that has created like the foundation during that time of the economy, and it's still what we have today.
The microphone. Yes.
Okay. Okay, I did ancient societal history of Thailand. The structure of society, ancient Thailand society was organized by monarchy with the king holding political, religious, and symbolic power. Ancient Thailand society is organized also by hierarchy and patronage. The hierarchy is divided by age, occupation, wealth, and residence. Ancient society had social mobility where individuals could rise through the ranks through merit, talent, or service to the monarchy. Peasant farmers are at the bottom of the hierarchy, followed by merchants, artisans, government officials, and oldest or socially ranked Thais would receive most respect. The family structure. Family is the foundation of social life in Thailand. The concept of family is pretty wide and inclusive, with Thais living in nuclear families and also extended families. The household structure is patriarchal, and the household would defer to the oldest man in the house, and households would have several generations living in the same house. It's pretty common for Thais to live with their parents until they're married, and sometimes if someone would have children, the children would also move in, and then family connections would determine career paths, and Thai males would go into the business of their father. Buddhism played a large role in a lot of the traditions in ancient Thai society. Thais have been practicing Theravada Buddhism since at least 100 AD. Hindu practices and Chinese beliefs have influenced local beliefs, which makes Thai Buddhism different than other types. Some ancient traditions include ceremonies and rituals to honor the king and royal family. Ceremonies would include traditional dance performances, music, and religious rites conducted by Buddhist monks. Traditional Thai medicine was also influenced by India and Chinese medicine for healing and wellness, and traditional crafts include pottery weaving, wood carving, and soap production. A lot of the influences in ancient Thailand were from India and the kingdoms of Hunan and the Khmer Empire. From the 10th to 14th centuries, Thailand was in a period of Khmer domination, where the Khmer Empire constructed temples and influenced architecture, and then the Thai city-states slowly became independent when the empire weakened. Comparing Thailand to the area that was the US during pre-13th century, indigenous people occupied the area that is now known as the United States. They had a wide range of spiritual beliefs, cultural traditions, and social customs, whereas like Thailand's spiritual beliefs were mostly focused on Buddhism. Thailand had networks of trade with India, China, and the Khmer Empire, and indigenous people also traded and communicated with other tribes and with the Aztec and Maya civilizations.
And some observations is that there is a lack of knowledge about this period of time, and the knowledge that is known is from archaeological evidence, but there's no like concrete sources. And Thailand is similar to other regions in Southeast Asia due to the heavy influence from culture and religions of India, and Buddhism had a large impact on Thailand society and the structure of Thailand society and rituals and ceremonies.
It's okay. Thank you. You will talk loud?
Okay,
Okay.
thanks. Okay, so I had the cultural presentation on the Thai political history, especially with the ancient era.
Take the mic.
Yeah.
Just speak up a little bit.
Sure, I can try this. Alright, hi guys. I have the cultural presentation on the Thai political history, especially within the ancient era, which leads up until the 13th century. Thanks. Okay, so starting off a little bit of the timeline, I focused on 3 particular kingdoms or like groups of kingdoms. The first one is the Funan Kingdom, which covered the 1st to the 6th century. This especially sprawled around the southern Vietnam, eastern Cambodia, and parts of Thailand, mainly surrounding the Mekong Delta. And so, as you can see here on the slide, they basically had a centralized monarchy featuring a king ruling over a bunch of provincial governors. This was really influential, especially down the road, as they paved the political and cultural framework for subsequent kingdoms. More specifically, the idea of a monarchy, as well as both Buddhism and Sanskrit. Moving on to the second kingdom, we have the Dvaravati Kingdom, which was mainly from the 6th to the 11th century. This was mainly a collection of various politically independent city-states, unified by their shared culture and religion. Specifically, they spoke the language of Mon, and they had a unified religion of Buddhism. And so each city-state here had a monarch, and this was certainly influenced by the previous Funan kingdom, but it was also decentralized, as none of them had reign over the others. And then lastly, moving on to the Lavo-Hari-Fanchai kingdoms. These were 2 kingdoms that were prominent as the Khmer were sort of taking control of the rest of Thailand. And the Lavo kingdoms went up until I think it was the 10th century or so, correct me if I'm wrong, whereas the Hari-Fanchai kingdom lasted until the 13th century. And so Lavo maintained a degree of autonomy with local chieftains and a king all under Khmer rule. And so this was certainly influenced by the governmental structure of the Funan Kingdom, whereas the Hari-Fanchai was ruled by a series of Mon kings under a centralized administration, which was also intertwined with Buddhism. And so we could see that that's certainly influenced by the Dvaravati Kingdom. As for influences on political history, we can see that each kingdom was shaped by those that lived nearby, especially like whether it was near water. That certainly influenced the trade that that the states conducted with. They also really incorporated the beliefs of the locals, so the Mon, the Thai, and the Khmer, into its government and religion, which those 2 became really intertwined, which compares with the U.S. and how we have separation of church and state. Specifically, Theravada Buddhism helped to, in their eyes, legitimize the king and the chieftain's rule over the centralized administrations, which was prominent in the Hari-Fanchai Kingdom, or the semi-autonomous administrations, which include the Funan, Dvaravati, and Lavo kingdoms. Just a really quick analysis, in ancient Thailand, you can see that there was a monarchy with, which was sort of bestowed with moral and religious duties, sort of like a protector of the faith, whereas additionally the religion and the government were intertwined together, you couldn't really separate it. Whereas I guess I would say 17th century US, that's kind of where I focused on. They had more of a democratic leadership with elected presidents and representatives, and of course there was a clear separation of church and state. So, just some quick observations. Well, I wouldn't really call that quick, but first, some forms of government. Thailand experienced a lot of transitions from absolute monarchy to constitutional monarchy, with periods of military rule in between. Whereas the U.S. sort of had a self-governance and transitioned to a federal republic. They remained relatively stable with periodic reforms, but there wasn't any sort of major transition of power. Regarding religion, in early Thai history, the monarch has always had a symbolic connection with Buddhism, as the king is really seen as a protector of faith, whereas in the U.S. there is a complete separation of church and state. Religion still does play a role in politics today, but it's more about, let's say, providing a little framework of like morals rather than actually legitimizing the government. And then lastly, as for culture, ancient Thailand did integrate various ethnicities together, including the Mon, Thai, and Khmer that we mentioned before. This was mainly because of interactions with the locals, whether it was like trade or political takeover. Whereas the U.S. has always also integrated ethnicities together, but this was more so the result of an influx of immigrants coming in from various amount of countries, and all of them were pretty much seeking opportunity or freedom. And yeah, that's it. Thank you.
I had ancient cultural history. So also, sorry for my pronunciations just to begin with. I'm doing just the culture. So to begin with, we have the people who inhabited the region. The first are the Mon people, who are the earliest inhabitants, and they established the Dvaravardi culture. And then the Khmer people, who are from the Khmer Empire, and the Malay people, who are from what is now known as Malaysia, which is just south of Thailand. And then there was also influence from Thai people who came from modern China and are believed to have had a large influence on present-day Thailand. And then language, since it was such a mixed bag, before being home to the Thai people in the Thai language, there was Mon, because it was the earliest settlers, and then there was Khmer from the Khmer Empire, Pali and Sanskrit, which are typical of the Buddhist religion and huge influences in this time period of Thai culture, and Thai, which is believed to be what the Thai language has evolved from currently, and Malay, which is also spoken particularly in the south where its neighbors in Malaysia. And then to talk a little bit about art, there was Dvaravardi art, which had a large Buddhist influence, and it had a big influence with stupas, which are bell-shaped structures, and Buddha images. Khmer art was famous for stone carvings and bronze statues, and had a lot of important temples and architectural structures. And then the Srivijaya Buddhist and Hindu sculptures were largely religiously oriented and huge for the time period, as well as maritime art depicting things with the theme of the ocean and navigational tools. And there was also local indigenous art from textiles and pottery. And then to talk a little bit about music, in Thailand it was believed to be reflective of the Buddhist culture and religion. Percussion instruments were a big part of the culture, particularly with drums, not only for music but for communicative purposes. They were used to convey messages over long distances too, as well as for rhythmic purposes. And then there were string instruments with the pin pia, a type of instrument played with a bow, and wind instruments with flutes made of bamboo. And then singing and vocal music was also a big part of the culture, and it was all very tied into the religious Buddhist ceremonies. And then food was more typical of hunter-gatherer society. A big part of it was rice, and that's been a staple of the Thai diet for a very long time, and it continues to be. But a lot of the things in the diet are a bit different to what we would currently associate with Thai culture. Fish and other aquatic animals were a big part of the diet because of geographic availability with the rivers. Forage foods, veggies, mushrooms, and hunted meats were also predominantly eaten because, hunter-gatherer. And fruits that we currently find in Thailand and that are big in the Thai diet, such as durian, banana, and mango, tropical fruits, were very heavily part of the Thai diet as well because of geographic availability again. But yeah, I'd emphasize eating foods that were locally available and sourced. So I didn't really have like any comparison with the US, but my family's Guatemalan, so to compare a little bit between ancient Thailand and ancient Guatemala, for anybody who doesn't know, this is Guatemala. It borders, it's in Central America. And the Mayan civilization was part of southern Mexico, all of Belize, and all of Guatemala. And they were similar in some aspects of like having huge architectural influence with temples, and their art was all influenced by the religion in each of the civilizations. So in Thailand, or modern day Thailand, it was Buddhist and Hindu influence, and in the Mayan civilization it was influenced by the indigenous religion, as well as with the diet. It was also very typical. I mean, I think of most areas this time in ancient civilizations to eat the local foods. So while they were eating different foods, they were both eating the foods that were locally available. Thank you.
Give me 3 minutes while I download all the presentations for the next group. Jacob, I need access. Where is Jacob? Give me access or send it to me as a attachment.
Okay. They say it in these. You can chat.
Meher. Jacob and Meher, just send your presentations. Okay, I think we can start. Jacob, you just send it to me while we start. Okay. Caroline.
Okay, so we're going into the okay.
so ancient.
Like a chair. I think I'm gonna do it. It'll teach us.
Okay.
It's getting better.
Getting better.
Yes.
Okay, so going into the Sukhothai period, this started in 1157 and it continued until 1438. The period started to begin when the Dravravadi and the Khmer rulers began to weaken, so those are the two groups that we just heard about. And when that happened, the Chinese people, called the Thai people who were moving into Thailand, started getting more integrated into society. And the Sukhothai period really began when this guy, Sri Intradit, was enthroned as the first king. It was characterized by 4 different marks. First, it was a small and independent kingdom, so for the first time, the leaders were really available to the people. They started to gain the people's trust, and under the strong leadership of Ramkhamhaeng the Great, they started to develop more alliances, diplomacy, and they expanded into Myanmar and Laos, which has significant influence over their art, which I'll show you in a minute. And finally, Theravada Buddhism really started to develop, and the goal of that was to achieve nirvana, which is the perfect place free from suffering. They had 2 major internal influences and 2 major external influences. For the internal ones, the indigenous styles from the previous period still were there and really influenced what the new innovative art looked like. But also the Theravada Buddhism and the more religious influence started having more impact on the art. And then for the external influences, the expansion and alliances into Myanmar and Laos really influenced the art as well. So Lana Lanka, which is present-day Sri Lanka, had really vibrant, big murals, and so you'll see some murals in a minute in the next few slides. And so did Bakin, which is the present-day Myanmar. They had more storytelling, types of literature integrated into the art as well. And so this is the golden era of Thai art. In terms of paintings, we saw a lot of murals influenced by Myanmar and Laos again. These showed Jataka tales, which is Buddha's past lives. They featured vibrant colors and a narrative style. So here you can see that Buddha is on this kind of chariot thing and all these people are bowing down to Buddha. And then in the others you can see some more indigenous styles and then some more storytelling in the middle. For sculptures, there's 4 different things I wanted to call out. The Buddha had a distinct oval face for the first time and a graceful posture, so that's some more of the Buddhist and religious influences. There was this flame-like Ushnisha, which is above his head, and that symbolized enlightenment and a gentle smile. And the key Buddha for this period was the walking Buddha. It was the journey of spreading the Dharma. And I thought it was really interesting in the museum we visited this morning. There were some walking Buddhas and graceful sitting Buddhas. So it was just exciting to see some of the research in real life. And then in terms of comparisons to Western art, there was big religious influence. So even though the US didn't exist at this time, for Western art in Europe, there's big influences from Christianity. And then in the Sukhothai period, there was influences from Theravada Buddhism. For the sculptures, Europe had really rigid figures, while the Sukhothai period was fluid and graceful, so that's more of a contrast than a comparison. And then for perspectives, I thought that these 2 things were really important, that there was integration into daily life, so the art wasn't just something that was nice to look at, but it really played a key part in how they saw their religion, how they practiced the religion day to day. And there was also deep symbolic depth. It wasn't just decorative, but it was also spiritual, with the Buddha demonstrating peace and enlightenment, and the people really wanting to translate that into how they lived. So that's it.
So I'm going to be talking about the history of architecture in the Sukhothai period, which lasted from 1157 to 1438. So just for a quick overview on this period, this was the first prominent kingdom in Thailand, and this has also paved the way for a big cultural foundation in Thailand. A lot of the architecture in this period transferred over to the future kingdoms in Thailand, and there was also in this period a huge emergence of distinct Thai architecture styles. So one big thing that came out of the architecture in this period was this Buddhist influence. So in a lot of the architecture in this period, there was a big focus on the Buddha, and also like around the Buddhas, there was the temples and the stupas. And I think Caroline was saying this, there's a very distinct way that they depicted the Buddha during this era. So it has very long limbs, oval face, smooth modeling, and you could see a lot of Buddhas that kind of looked like this in the museum that we went to today. So just to go over the temple layouts, they had a strong focus on the central shedi, which is this middle part right here. And then those shedis were often at a very high base. And then the surrounding structures had these smaller stupas with a lot of smaller prayer halls surrounding it. And the next period, which is the Ayutthaya period, mimics this style a lot. A lot of the temples that we went to yesterday had the same kind of a style where there was very central main focus points at high bases with smaller surrounding bases. And they took a lot of architecture from this period as that was directly after the Sukhothai period. Another prominent thing that was used in this period was the brick and stucco use within the architecture. So a lot of the building materials were either made of brick or stucco, and many of the temple structures had this intricate stucco designs, and these often depicted the life of Buddha and other tales. So you can see here, I believe this is from a museum, there's carvings in this brick that just kind of show different stories of Buddha. And then just to go over some of the prominent sites from this era, there's the Wat Si-chum temple. So this picture doesn't really do it justice, but it's a huge seated Buddha that's kind of in between two walls. And this is a key example of the period's architectural achievements. And then another temple is the Wat Si, which symbolizes the relationship between nature and architecture as they incorporate the lotus in a lot of the architecture. And then I believe both of these temples are in the Sukhothai Historical Park. And this historical park, it's about 200 miles north of where we are right now. And you can see here they have like the central shedi again. These are within the same park. And for a quick comparison to the US, a lot of the architecture here was very centered in religion, obviously, as the Buddha's shown in a lot of different places. And in the US, there's definitely a lack of religious-centered architecture. We have churches and other temples in different areas, urban and non-urban, but the architecture isn't primarily focused around religion. And then these are my sources. Thank you.
Hello everyone. Today I'm going to be talking about the Sukhothai period, and let's be talking about the history of the science, technology, and medicine. So traditional medicine and herbalism played a crucial role in healthcare during this period. We had local healers known as Morpi that served as primary caregivers or kind of like spiritual doctors that were in the communities during this kingdom. These healers possessed a deep understanding of medical plants and holistic healing practices, drawing upon like centuries of like indigenous knowledge, and this was passed down through like many generations. So these Morpi practitioners, they had the knowledge of these plants to the native region. They understand the unique properties of these plants, and the preparation methods and the therapeutic applications to it. They collected a lot of different lists of herbs such as like roots, leaves, bark, flowers, demonstrating the great care in selecting and combining these like natural ingredients to create like remedies to various alignments and health conditions. They would plan using various techniques to maximize their healing, the herbs in hot water, and then boiling the plant material to extract their active compounds by soaking the herbs in alcohol or another solvent. And then for external use, they created a poultice, which is like a soft, moist mass of plant material applied to the skin to elevate pain, inflammation. So that's how they use up their environment to like maintain and restore health in their community. They also use hydraulic engineering. So this was basically to focus on minimizing the water loss through evaporation and seepage. The engineers implemented a technique such as canals, and they would construct networks of these canals to distribute water resources across like the fertile plains of this kingdom. And these canals was often dug manually or with like rudimentary tools. And they would basically spread the water to like the fields to make sure that there was consistent moisture level for like the crops. And is basically to optimize like water flow and minimize the water wastage. Yeah. And then when it came to technology, I was also figuring out like different techniques that brought innovation to this period, and one of them was metalworking. This led to like different intricate metal sculptures and artifacts, and they used a tool called broadcasting in particular, and they use it in like the Buddhas or like different religious sculptures. And then I'm gonna talk more about broadcasting. This technique, they would first create clay of their desired sculpture, and then they would coat it with different layers of the clay to form a mold. And then once the mold dried, the multiples was poured into a cavity, taking the shape of like the original model. And then after cooling, the bronze sculpture was carefully removed, and it was like molded, refined, and polished to perfection. And that's it.
Hello everyone, so I did intellectual history of the Sukhothai period. So one of the main important things about this period is Theravada Buddhism, which was actually introduced several centuries earlier, as we've already heard, but this became deeply ingrained in the culture during this period. There were really important principles in governance, art, and daily rituals, and the leaders of the time promoted Theravada Buddhism to their people. So, as Buddhism kind of spread through the country, mixed with local animist beliefs and practices. So, animism is essentially an idea that you attribute a soul to plants and inanimate objects, things that aren't sentient, really. And so this kind of blended with ideas of Buddhism as well. So another important thing is the Thai script. This emerged during this time with King Angkor, which facilitated the spread of literacy and education, and in turn contributed to much intellectual growth. Another part of this was Buddhist scriptures were translated into Thai and helped with the spread of Buddhism. Another part of this Thai script being introduced was that literature and the arts. So those Jataka tales that we heard earlier with the art presentation, those were also adapted into literature. And again, Buddhist ideas were implemented into sculpture and architecture, specifically cosmology and moral ideas of Buddhism. Additionally, we had some moving and shaking in politics and governance. So kingdoms experimented with different administrative structures and policies, but what was really most important about this time was King Ramkhamhaya's famous inscription, which is often referred to as Sukhothai inscription number 1, which was discovered in 1833 but was dated back to 1292 and describes the Sukhothai kingdom during the time of King Ramkhamhaya, and is considered the most important document in Thai history. So there were some outside influences during this time to the Thai kingdom. So there's influences from India and Khmer, which is sort of near Cambodia, where Cambodia is now. So religious and philosophical ideas were shaped by these kingdoms, and there was additional influence from Buddhism, as we've already said. So some key intellectual figures during this time would be, as I've said too many times before today, King Ramkhamhayan, who was, I'm sorry, you can't really see the words, but he was important in spreading Theravada Buddhism and as well in politics, art, religion in general. He was the king. And we also had these other people who essentially did the same thing. They were just important in spreading ideas of Theravada Buddhism during the time. Alright, so some comparisons between Thailand and the USA at this time would be the Theravada Buddhism was similar to Protestant Christianity towards the beginning of the United States. These important people that I've mentioned aforementioned, could be compared to the Founding Fathers, and this inscription, this political inscription from the king could be considered or compared to Federalist Papers in early governance in the United States. Indian and Khmer influences could be compared to European influences in the United States, in the early United States. And last thing I just want to mention was something that I thought of while I was researching was I read a book called Guns, Germs, and Steel a long time ago. And in this book it talks about how people with guns, germs, and steel have been the victors of history. Essentially people with more tend to be victorious in conflict. It also talks about the importance of writing a language in the nation's ability to communicate and unite and spread influence to other countries. So I thought that was similar to the development of Thai script during this period. It kind of gave a united ideology around that specific language and helped unite the kingdom at the time, spread Buddhism, all those things. Thank you.
I'm going to be talking about the Sukhothai economy. This era is often referenced as a Thai golden age. I think a rough Sanskrit translation gives us the happiness of Thai and the dawn of happiness. And though this isn't particularly or exclusively referencing the economy is definitely a part of this. So trade was a big thing in Sukhothai because of its location. It was a very ideal hub for commerce because of its central location, kind of sandwiched between many other kingdoms, as well as its location along major trade routes and rivers, such as the Maritime Silk Road, which I think was mentioned in previous presentations. It had very vibrant markets that included textiles, ceramics, spices, precious metals, and other luxury items. However, trade was not limited to these goods because of the presence of academics and artists and whatnot. Not just goods, but services were also traded, and cultural practices were traded in Sukhothai cities. And on top of this trade hub, an advanced taxation system was implemented in Sukhothai, and this was another big source of revenue for the kingdom. Agriculture is kind of the backbone of the economy. Rice, as it still is now, is a primary crop and the #1 export. They also produce, though, sugarcane, indigo, and many fruits. I think Sidel mentioned a bit of engineering that went into agriculture and the complexity of the irrigation systems. They had advanced canals and reservoirs that propped up agriculture as an industry. And this is a quote from the Sukhothai inscription #1 that Jacob just mentioned. It says, "There's fish in the water and there's rice in the paddy fields," kind of just symbolizing how abundant and rich the land was and how that was both recognized and used by the kingdom. Ceramics were another large export and source of income for the kingdom, specifically these green glazed ceramics that you can see in the picture to the right. They reached many regions in Southeast Asia, as well as beyond in the Middle East and Japan. They filled a gap made by a Chinese ban during part of this period on foreign exports. And so a lot of the ceramic pieces were almost modeled and mimicked after some Chinese styles, which is really interesting. Next slide. As time went on and trade routes changed, Sukhothai kind of faded out of being a major trade center. And that's one of the things that made it susceptible to Ayutthaya absorption. And unlike ceramics and other exports that aren't necessarily as prominent, as time goes on, rice was kind of a constant throughout Thailand's history, which I found really interesting, and that's something that stood out to me, as we just had a talk about agriculture and the importance of agriculture and uplifting that industry today. Looking back at Thailand's history and kind of comparing it to the US, and how agriculture is kind of has to be and is an important thing everywhere, specifically to the economy, even though we overlook it, at least in the US, it's often overlooked. And that was kind of a main takeaway that I had in comparison that I was specifically able to make with my research. Thank you.
Oh, we good.
It's okay.
No, they're just clear.
Oh, they're cooking?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, I all right, so here's the societal history of the Sukhothai era. Yeah. So first up, the social hierarchy. So social status was, was a relatively rigid social structure. There was not too much social mobility, but at the top of it all was the king. The king was your absolute monarch. He was also the religious leader, and he was really responsible for upholding, Buddhism and spreading it, yada yada yada. So really, the social hierarchy can be split into two groups. You have the ruling and the ruled. The rulers were the monarchs, so the king takes over after they defeated the Khmer, and the king was believed to own the entire country. So it was a bit of a feudal system where it was based on land ownership, and so the king was at the top of it all. And then nobilities and royal family was also. And then you had the ruled, like monks, peasants, and some slaves, which limited evidence because limited documentation. And then next, politics and economics. Yes, so this was a pretty egalitarian for the time. It basically means that people were generally treated pretty equally. So golden age, right? It was based on good patron client relationships, and many social and religious institutions were set up during this time, really, upped the quality of social life and quality of life in general. So, economics, as whoever was before me mentioned, it was, based on agricultural production. Sorry, Sid. And it was also, dependent on some industrial exports such as ceramics, which often get exported to like China. Yeah. So, a lot of trade going on. It was a golden age. Next slide. So obviously the exports in religion led to some societal changes, as before Sukhothai there was many different religions, and then really during the Sukhothai period we see Buddhism take over, and so all of a sudden society changes. Monasteries and temples are built, and the king is heavily influenced by Sri Lanka. Oh, that was included. Exports become incredibly important. So obviously, we're transitioning away from just small city-states and whatever to exports. This is a real first-built kingdom, and so more specialization. People begin to move into larger cities, followed by more and more opportunities. Thai script is developed, so obviously education becomes more important, right? Society is developing, and technologies advance, and the quality of life increases, like I mentioned before. On to the next one, when we talk about family and tradition, obviously Buddhism is taking over the entire population, and people begin to focus on the concept of karma, right? So obviously the whole idea of egalitarianism, treating people better, and the principles of Buddhism established and really alter the lifestyle of the entire population. The king is referred to as the father of all people, so he's got to take care of everyone. And then it's a patriarchal system where the eldest male was the head of family, married. Heritage was traced through the male lineage. So your elders were well respected. They provided guidance, and they kept traditions alive. Very important. And then there were the occasional arranged marriages. Right. Next slide. So comparisons to American culture. Sukhothai was a major trading society, right, for the first time, I guess, in Thai history. So it became a trading hub with Southeast Asia, where we had trade between China, India, some Europe, just all over the place. And in comparison, American economics is very export import heavy, right? They're very much based on exportation. The difference is what we're exactly exporting. American industry versus the Sukhothai agriculture, right? So, what are we focusing on? Education was incredibly important during the Sukhothai kingdom. Obviously, as we modernize, that becomes increasingly more so. And family is a central unit of social organization, which I would argue is fairly prominent in American culture too. My take. Alright, Sukhothai was the golden age, and a super important time period for Thailand. It really established a lot of what's going on now in the modern Thai era. Right? So we have the creation of the Thai script, which is still prominent today. Conversion to Buddhism, which still obviously is evident today. And updated political structure, similar today. Yes, the huge influence on modern Thai culture, which is very important. Societal practices from the time period are still existent, familiar structures, whatever. King is a benevolent ruler, well respected, top of it all. And then, in my opinion, a hugely important time for Thai people, as I mentioned before. It's really prominent cultures and traditions that we still see today in modern time periods. Right? So society, very important, very interesting. And my citation. I don't know. Oh, sorry.
So I looked at political history in the Sukhothai period. So Si Intharuati is the first king of the Sukhothai kingdom, and he ruled until 1270. He's credited as the founder of the Prarang dynasty, and this was considered to be the first historical Siamese dynasty. It was the dynasty that freed the Thai principalities from the Khmer Empire, and he was also given this name, Pho Kong Bang Klang Ho, which was interpreted as the Lord who rules the sky. But there is some controversy surrounding this name because of limitations in epigraphy. And before coming to power, he was the chief of the Bang Yang territory, and that was a territory that belonged to the Khmer Empire. And together with a Thai nobleman, Ba Meng, they rebelled against the empire and declared independence. And the people titled him, I can't quite see the second word, but I know it translates to their prince, so he was really loved by the people. And then the next really influential leader of this kingdom was Ram Kamang the Great, and under his reign, the kingdom was centralized and it reached its greatest extent. He initiated relations with the Yun dynasty, which was in China, and gave the kingdom the ability to produce exports in the form of ceramics, which some other presentations have touched on. So it was definitely a period in which their economy was able to flourish. And after his reign, the kingdom fell into decline and was eventually invaded by the Ayutthaya kingdom. And it became a tributary state of Ayutthaya until it was annexed in 1438. But Sukhothai nobility continued to influence the political structure in the Ayutthayan kingdom. And this picture here, you can just see this is the greatest extent that the Sukhothai kingdom reached. So in comparison to the United States, as a couple other people have said, this era was critical in cementing Thai culture, and it was a period of political stability that provided foundation for subsequent Thai kingdoms, and it was labeled the Golden Age of Thai history. So I looked into the Golden Age of American history, and that's considered to be the 1950s. This is a post-war period after World War II, where there was a lot of new economical development and jobs were more readily available, and new types of customs emerged that influenced American culture. So both of these time periods were really influential for culture in Thailand and in the United States. And a unique perspective on the period, the political stability of the Sukhothai kingdom allowed for a lot of different benefits. I decided to go with something related to climate because we are on the climate science dialogue. So it really allowed for sustainability to become an option for them, and they were able to create complex networks of canals, reservoirs, and irrigation systems, which were critical for producing rice. And this gave advancements to their irrigation systems, which allowed them to better feed their people. So once again, it was just a period of political stability where the people loved their rulers, and the Thai culture was able to develop and thrive under this stable political environment.
Okay, so I'm specifically talking about language within the cultural aspects of the Sukhothai era. So just for some of the contents, I'm going to talk about the king that has been talked about a bunch already, but then also stone tablets, education, my perspectives. So King Ramkhamhaeng the Great is often called the father of the Thai language. And that's because in 1283 CE, he compiled the Thai alphabet, or a completely new system of writing, which he adapted from the Mon and Khmer scripts.
which both derive from South Indian scripts originally. So it's interesting because the alphabet is still in use today, even though it's undergone some changes. It's still in use now, and the king basically instituted a bunch of new consonants, vowels, and tonal marks, which allowed the script to better convey the actual speaking accent instead of previously wasn't able to as accurately describe this. So it's more intricate. So as previously talked about a bit, but the stone tablets were one way that the new script was actually able to be used and instituted. So the king often ordered inscriptions which told the story of the kingdom and its prosperity. And I think Jacob and Sydney, I believe, also quoted this exact same thing. This is one example of how this inscription was talking about how the kingdom's thriving and there's lots of trade and good agriculture, everyone's happy, and so it just shows the impact of the script in that way to show historical significance. And then furthermore, the education is also a big part of which kind of stemmed from the script. So in Buddhism, the king often he was a big Buddhist. He always attended sermons and encouraged the population to attend sermons and brought awareness to Buddhism, and in that way there was a lot of improved literacy through the population attending these religious ceremonies and stuff. And then this period is also really well known for being an intellectual period where there's lots of prominent scholars and authors. So, for example, King Ayutthaya, which is who's after the other king I talked about before, but he was a big scholar and then also authors of various books. And then another thing that I found is that this story, Nopamu's story, was a book that talked about women's education and kind of was in support of not just of women, also having more than just domestic duties, is trying to encourage that women also have the capability to learn out of school and get literacy education. So some stuff about my perspectives. Basically, I thought it was really interesting how important that this era was on it had a really lasting effect, even in the present day. The script is still used today, and so it's interesting to see how the king was able to make this impact on even the current population from so long ago. And then it's also cool to see how religion is able to shape education in this way, and how the king was through pushing education and through pushing religion was able to promote education and promote the use of literacy and learning this new script within the population. And then also it was really interesting to see how even during this time when there was a lot of inequality, women were able to voice their opinions and try to push for women's rights. And that's it. Thank you.
Just send me your presentation one more time. Thanks, Olivia. Your access was due. Jennifer, Olivia, send me with access or as an attachment.
the architecture, during this period there was the construction of magnificent temples and palaces, some of which we visited here in Ayutthaya, and they were characterized by the distinctive praying, which is the tower-like structures, and the intricate stucco ornamentation. And so this is just a couple of different examples. There's the Wat Phra Sinsan Phet and the Wat Phra Mahatha. And so most of the sculptures developed during this period were Buddhas, or Bodhisattvas, and other like divine beings. And they were made from stone, bronze, or stucco, and they adorned temples and palaces across the kingdom. So these could really be seen everywhere. And then, okay, next slide. There were also various paintings. So there was the traditional time painting during this period, with murals adorning the walls of temples and palaces. And they often feature scenes from Lives of the Buddha, the Jataka tales, and Heavenly Realms. The manuscript cabinet has some lore around it. No one really knows exactly like the figures depicted on it, but it's predicted that they might have been like European kings, which suggests like the foreign influence. And then the Buddha footprint it's said that it was like the footprint of the Buddha when he was young. Oh, this was supposed to be on the other slide, but there's our professor, and then the Buddha head in the tree, which is relevant to the Buddha statues. Okay, so the decline of the Ayutthaya period, it fell in 1767 to the Burmese army, which led to the destruction of many temples and art during this period. However, Thai art experienced a revival during the subsequent Thonburi period under King Kongsin, and the construction of new temples and the restoration of cultural heritage. So while there was a gap in this period of art, it was later revived. And so some cultural comparisons to more like modern America, just Western culture in general. The ancient Ayutthaya period is pretty different from what we've experienced today. But there are some similarities since both of these periods have a lot of influence from foreign cultures, which influenced the art and the culture of people during this era. Next slide. And so specifically, I wanted to focus on how the importance of art has shifted over the time. So art in the Ayutthaya period was very heavily religiously focused. As I just talked about, everything pretty much centered around the Buddha and the Buddhist religion. But art in the modern Western world, there's a lot of, or art is used as an expression of self and society. And so while there's still like religious aspects, it's also shifted to represent other things. And also art has been heavily commercialized in the modern Western world. It's something.
Please.
Yeah. All right. So we are going to be talking specifically about architecture and adding on to Ellen's presentation. So we have Ayutthaya and Thonburi from 1350 to 1782. And so first we're going to go into historical context before I start continuing specifically on architecture. Yeah, so here's a little Dan right here. Yeah. Okay, so first we visited both these places yesterday. And so first, historically, so the king died, leaving both the thrones to his sons, and so the two other sons both claimed the throne, and they fought, and they died because they killed each other for power. And this leaving the throne to the third son, Chao Sampari, became king. And so, yeah, you can go next, that's okay. So this is the other place we went to yesterday, and you're giving more historical context. So when Ayutthaya, specifically this palace was constructed, he founded the city as well. And so first it was a residential palace, and then it became a monastery, and then eventually it became a temple. So it had historical context throughout this journey, and was used very
importantly throughout this time. And so, as you can see here, we have the three cheetahs that we went to yesterday. So 1, 2, and 3 here. And so there's a historical significance with this, given that there's the 3 kings' ashes were buried in each of these. And so it shows like not only that they were like significance historically and also the power that they held. And so this is like the main 2 historical elements that I want to touch on. So we have prayings on the left, and so as you can see here, they're very high in structure. We went and visited this one yesterday. Hopefully y'all remember it. But you have spire-like structures, and it has very ornate detailing throughout the whole entire structure. And then here on the right, this is what we just talked about, but they're also very high in structure, and throughout not only the base, but throughout the very top, you have very like fine details that you can see throughout when you walk around the whole structure. So, all right, so next we have Frau Rancha Renderm, which translates to the original palace, and so this was a point of instability within this period, and so the palace was built as the new capital, and so the Thai architecture, as you can see here, was teak wood and sloping roofs and intricate carvings, and there was also, very interestingly, European influence in balconies and verandas, as you can see here, and so this was used specifically because of the king at the time, Rama IV, went to the west to have influence and was very interested in those designs. And then so comparison, so I went to Portugal in the fall semester, and so I wanted to compare the architecture styles within these regions, and so this was the 16th century architecture style, and these buildings were used to demonstrate wealth and power within the region. And it was very interesting to see how like Christian elements and the motifs throughout this history was used to demonstrate in the spires, and you can see oculuses as well as like rounded arches, which you don't always see in the architectural style of Thailand.
Hello, I'm going to be talking about science and technology. Okay, so the first thing I saw was I read this article about the canal systems in Ayutthaya that I thought was interesting. So they designed a series of canals that led to the sea. So all these blue ones were the existing canals, and then these green ones, like down here and up here, were the artificial ones that they built. And they originally made these for trade and defensive purposes, but then a lot of people ended up settling near the artificial levees, and they used them for agriculture and specifically grew a lot of rice on them, and they're still used today in flood control plans. And next I'm going to talk a little bit about the medicines. So there was an official medical system developed in 1659 by King Narayana the Great. And medicine at the time was called the Great Tradition. So a core belief to this system was that elements cause disease, and these elements were earth, water, air, and fire. And within the system there were certain specialists appointed by kings, and these specialists trained and studied, and these studies were regulated by the royal decree. Okay, so it was really important that this knowledge was passed down to the next generations. So they recorded a lot of their information on palm leaf paper, which is shown in that picture, or inscripted in silver, stone, and gold plates. And this information was highly valued and it was often kept in the libraries and private collections of noblemen. And then there was a body of knowledge called the theory of medicine, which included two important books called The Glittering Gems of Knowledge and The Scripture of Disease and Related Issues, which is where I got a lot of my information from. And then in terms of the influence from other cultures, so overall Thai medicine was an independent system and it wasn't completely derived from any other culture. However, there are a lot of shared elements between China, Greece, and India. In particular, the idea that disease comes from the four elements, which I talked about on the previous slide. And then it's highly theorized that these countries shared this knowledge because there's also historical record of contact between these three countries. And then in terms of the comparisons to the US, in the US at the same time, the primary belief was humoral theory, which was basically the idea that disease was caused by an imbalance of bodily fluids. And this was brought to the US by people from England. And any medical practice that wasn't related to humoral theory was deemed as heretical, and those who practiced it were labeled witches. So overall, some of my observations and perspectives was that Thailand seemed much more open to other cultural influences, whereas the US kind of rejected any native or native medicine or any other culture's beliefs. And then I also thought it was interesting that canals that were created hundreds of years ago are still important to the structure of the city today.
It's okay. It's okay. The question will be next. You can put it here. Yes.
Hello, I'm going to be talking about the intellectual history. Alright, just to start, kind of the intellectual landscape currently is that during this era, this is when they state that Buddhism is the current religion for the state. For them, it means kind of the way of elders, and it's one of the two main schools of Buddhism still practiced to this day. Along with Buddhism, and also there was an influence of Hinduism in this time period as well, and this shaped kind of the kingdom's ideologies and practices during this time. Also, most of the information provided during this time period for the intellectual history can be found within the Royal Chronicles, which I'll talk more in the presentation. So like I said before, this era was really influenced by both Buddhism and Hinduism, but in two different ways. For Buddhism, it was more towards kind of like the kingdom's spiritual and intellectual life. They had monasteries there where the monks came and taught about their philosophies and learnings to the people in the era. And then for Hinduism, it was way more presented in the warrior court. For example, the king was often seen as a god king. For influences, both external and internal, like before said in other presentations, Ayutthaya was a major trading hub, so it had a lot of people from China, India, and Europe, and this brought new ideologies to the kingdom. The royal court also had a really big influence among kings as well. For example, kings were patrons of the religious institutions. For example, we saw the grand temples and palaces were built to reflect the kingdom's spiritual beliefs. And scholars are the ones who wrote the Royal Chronicles, is how we know about the intellectual history during this time period. So like the buildings we saw, they kind of reflect the fusion of both Buddhism and Hinduism. When comparing to like the US, I kind of did it towards like currently the US right now. So like I said before, Buddhism and Hinduism were kind of the two only religions during this area. But for example, like the US, we're very diverse in religion. This is mostly due to immigration for people coming from different sides. So you can see in this chart how we're very like diverse in that. And then for similarities, I feel like both Ayutthaya and the US integrated various cultural elements. For example, like Ayutthaya had a lot of like rivers and connections. It had a lot of people from different places bringing different ideologies. Same like the US, we have a lot of like blended cultures here. And then some of my personal takeaways from what I learned is that I kind of like learned Buddhism kind of created a sense of community for everyone to follow and connect with. They very much respect this among the Thai people here, like they're still practicing it after many years. And I feel like also Buddhism was based more on like human experience and potential rather than like following the personal God. And that's it. Thank you.
How many more are left in this session?
Four.
I would suggest we take a break now. Just make it more of a working break. Get the food and then let's continue with the presentation. We do want to end at 5.
Can I start? Yeah. Okay, so I'll be presenting on the history of economy in Ayutthaya and Hungary. So just to start with some context, from the 1350s, there wasn't much like information about what the economy was like during this time, but these are just some things that I think are important that influence kind of like the bulk of what I'll be talking about. And so some important things to note are that it was originally a maritime confederation, and then after following political organization from the northern cities for 2 centuries, Ayutthaya became a hinterland state. It was the second capital of the Siamese kingdom, and I'll get into this now. This will be kind of the bulk of the economic history, but it became one of the most powerful states because of trade. So now moving into that, the trade and expansion and whatnot, from around 1500 to 1600. So Ayutthaya was an entrepot, so essentially just a city for import and export of international trade. And this kind of occurred so because of its geographical location. It's located in between India and China, more specifically the Gulf of Siam. And this allowed for trade between Asian, European, and Middle Eastern traders. And they also utilized floating markets, which we still see today. The main good that was exported was rice, and in turn we got a lot of imported luxury goods. And because of all of this economic success from trade, that led to the development of their new monetary system, which at first was cowrie shells and then eventually developed into coins, which are still used today, as we know. And all of this wealth development also allowed for a lot of grand building projects, primarily canal systems, which once again we see that waterways were super important. So they invested money into that, as well as other things like buildings, military expansion, and whatnot. This was really just like the peak time economically for Ayutthaya. So now, moving into the decline, which started in around 1700, and in that gap from 1600 to 1700, essentially they were just doing very well. But then come 1700, there was a lot of economic strains due to pressures from Burma, which is now Myanmar. There was also a lot of political issues, and it's very complex, but since I'm talking about economics, just be focusing on that part. And essentially, they were fighting over Lower Burma, which was an important trade route in the Indian Ocean. And the decline happened really quickly. Essentially, the last point was that it just was attacked by Burma and the city became deserted. And so now moving into Thonburi from 1767 to 1782, as some other people have talked about already, it became the new capital, and it was founded by Ayutthaya the Great. And going back into the trade of it all, expanded trade with Chinese specifically from King China, sorry if I said that wrong. And this led to a lot of increased influence of the Chinese community during this time period. And economically speaking, there was some success, but as we can see, it only lasted 20 or so years, not even. So it was okay. Eventually it fell to Chow Chapri, who was a military commander. And moving on to a comparison to the US, similarly the US was a big trading hub during this time period, specifically and most similarly in the colonial era from the 1600s to 1700s. The US really utilized the Atlantic Highway, in which we took part in the triangular trade with Britain and Africa across the Atlantic Ocean. And like I said, this was just very similar to Thailand, as we used the waterways and trade was the main driver of the economy. And then just some of my perspectives and main takeaways. It was really interesting to learn about how Ayutthaya was such an affluent city, because I think we've talked a lot about the ruins and how it fell and how it's an ancient city. And yeah, this was kind of just the first time I heard about how great of a city it was and just all of the affluence of it. And it was interesting how this is the other side of the world. The economic development was very similar to the US and so many other countries. And
interesting to see about all the globalization, how trade influenced the communities.
Okay, I studied the societal history of this period Ayutthaya and Thunbury from 1350 to 1782. The main structure of the society was primarily consistent of social classes and tiers. So the first is Munai, which is the top of the tier list, and this is the tax-exempt elite, which consists of the king and lords, as well as other wealthy individuals in the capital sector. And then there's two fry categories. One is royal servicemen working for a specified period each year for the crown. And mainly this would be like 6 months working for the crown. They would move out of their homes, and then 6 months in their agricultural farms, doing their own income and own wealth. And then the second and last category were commoners who had no tie to the crown other than they were being ruled by them, and they would make their own money all throughout the year for themselves. And this is the largest portion of people. And their income came from homemade goods and textiles. And then the saying was the Buddhist community who was open to all classes of men, even the Chinese who could immigrate to the kingdom. And this was not, they didn't make their own income, but this was the religious sector. And then the legal code, the Dharma Sastra, was a code they created in this time period based on Hindu sources and traditional Thai practices, which created the rules governing all levels of people. And then for the family cultures and traditions, all the families in this time period were extended family systems, especially in the Thunbury period following the destruction of Ayutthaya. The families wanted to rely on each other for support, both socially and economically. So all the family lived under one household, nieces, nephews, grandparents. And then a lot of the marriages were arranged for economic relationships. And polygamy was also very popular just for, it was bigger in the elite sector because it would mean more elite status and social status could be heightened through this. And then traditional gender roles just through patriarchy, and the men were the ruling members of the household. And then just from post-war construction, a lot of these categories are emphasized because people wanted to rely on each other through the stabilizing period, both politically and economically. And then inheritance was great because they wanted to keep the money in the family, so they passed it down through each other. And then heavy financial donations were made to the Buddhism community by the king after the collapse of the kingdom because they wanted to create the religious sector to be bigger after it fell apart following the kingdom collapse. And then the influence that the kingdom had on both of these time periods were that King Rama II created a corvée system, which every freeman must be registered as a servant. And this was because regional wars there's a lot of agricultural space that was great for harvesting, and there would be regional wars to determine who would get that space, and this resulted in many conquered people from other kingdoms moving to this kingdom, and after a while they could be registered as freemen. And then the king also gave rice fields to court officials, governors, and commanders within the Sakdina system in return for their political services. And the more fields that they got was determined whether how many fry they could manage. And then the perspective that I brought in
I compared it to the U.S. now. I thought the social class mobility was similar to how we run as a democracy now. And even though they're working under a monarchy, it was different than a lot of the surrounding kingdoms because people could move up and down the social network based on how hard they worked. So it was merit-based appointments, whether how much wealth they inherited, how much wealth they got from the work that they did. There was room for moving up and down the social rankings. So I just said that I thought it was interesting how they differed from surrounding kingdoms, and it is connected to the U.S. now. And even though they have a monarchy, it's similar to us working for the government.
Hello, so I'll be talking about the political history in Thailand during the Ayutthaya period. So first we can just go through some of the dynasties. So first they had the Yuthon dynasty, and then it was overthrown by the Sukhothai, but then the Yuthon came back, and then the Sukhothai came back, and then we had the Sukhothai, and then the Prasetthong, and Bonpurulong. So here are some of just the kings during that time. There was around like 30 kings, so I kind of just highlighted some of the most important ones. So first we have the very first king of the kingdom, King Ramathibodi I. He was the founder, and he was both a political and religious figure. He kind of embodied the concept of divine kingship, which I'll talk about later. And then during the second Supanotham dynasty, we have King Boromatra. You can read it. He was nicknamed the King of White Elephants, and he is kind of regarded as one of the greatest Thai monarchs. He reformed bureaucracy, and he separated military and civil officials, and he also established the mandala system, which we'll talk about later as well. During the Sukhothai period, we have King Narswan, and he's extremely popular or well known for defending and freeing the kingdom from Burmese control. And then during the Prasetthong period, we have King Narai, and he's kind of known for his efforts in improving foreign relations with France. During the Prasetthong period is also when the Summer Palace was built. It was actually built by King Prasetthong, who was the first king during the time. So now for political ideals, so we have divine kingship. Divine kingship, or Devaraha, or divine king, kind of saying that authority is derived from God. So during this time, the king was regarded as both a bodhisattva and an incarnation of the Brahmin god. So bodhisattva is in Buddhism. So it's just a person who is on the path to nirvana or bodhi awakening, which is the ultimate goal of Buddhism. And then he's also an incarnation of a Brahmin god, which is a hidden god. And then we have the mandala system, which I mentioned earlier, which mandala means circle. So it's very common throughout Southeast Asia during this time, and it was kind of a system of distributing power locally since Siam was so big during this time. So next we have some political events. There were a lot of wars. We expanded north, or Thailand expanded north during this time a lot. Throughout the 14th and 16th century, they invaded, took over Sukhothai, Landa, Khmer, which we can see in this map. Just kind of the north parts here, there, and there. And then, of course, there's a lot of Burmese invasions that we've been talking about. They invaded Siam at least 15 times during this time, and under King Narswan, as I mentioned earlier, it was finally freed, although they did attack later. And then during this time, there's also a lot of internal struggles. I won't go through every single one of these, but basically, after a king died, usually it's the first son who ascends the throne, but sometimes they would face some internal struggles from either family members or other nobles during that time who wanted to fight for the power. So yeah, sometimes it was even their younger brother who was trying to ascend to the throne. And then, so then in 1767, internal struggles was kind of a big part to why the Ayutthaya kingdom fell as it was suffering from lots of internal turmoil, which weakened central authority. And then that, along with the external conflicts with Burmese invasions, ultimately led to the period's downfall. And then my perspective, I think there were significant religious influences on the government during this time. For example, the king had divine or supreme authority, yet they still operated under the Mandala system, which was a system of local authorities, so he kind of was able to give some of the power to local authorities. So I think this balance of power allowed Thailand to maintain control over its large territory and even expand quite a bit during this time while accommodating to the local specifications.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about Ayutthaya culture. So first, to understand the Ayutthaya culture, you have to understand where Thailand and Ayutthaya was in history at this time. And so the way that the Ayutthaya kingdom emerged was originally coming from a small city on the edge of the Khmer Empire. And so eventually the Ayutthaya pushed out the Khmer Empire and actually eventually ransacked the Khmer capital, Angkor, which is where Angkor Wat is. And when they did this, they brought back officials and craftsmen as captives. And they also started to adopt Hindu ideas and practices followed by the Khmer. And this is just an example of one of the practices they adopted was the God King, which is the concept that the king has the power to determine the life and death of all of his people. And actually only royals could see his face. Okay, so the Old Thai dialect, the Ayutthaya dialect, actually emerged from a combination of the Khmer language and Old Thai. So Khmer was actually a bilingual society. And so this is just showing how the past Khmer Empire has influence on the Ayutthaya kingdom. And so this is the language that modern Thai emerged from. And it started emerging as the older Khmer generations evolved. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the art, and the art actually reflects this transition from the Khmer Empire towards the Ayutthaya kingdom. And so I want to focus on these two pieces here. So originally the Ayutthaya, they embraced the Hindu influences from Khmer. However, they started incorporating their own Theravada Buddhism into their art. Okay, so now I want to compare it to the US. This is a comparison of both, 1700s US, but also more currently. So I want to talk about first the US and how an empire has influence on the, the revolutionaries in a similar way that the Khmer Empire had influence on the Ayutthaya. So obviously we have a lot of British culture remaining in the United States culture. To say that for some examples we have capitalism, we have property rights are based on things like John Locke's writing, British, and then the resist of abuse of power, governmental power. Secondly, I want to talk about how we also are starting to see a bilingual culture arise in the US, where nearly 41 million people speak Spanish in the US, which is a good sized population. It's not the majority, of course, but it's a good sized population. And then we have a range of religions. So if you want to flip to the next slide, I can make the direct comparison of both Ayutthaya and the US retain cultural aspects of their former empire. I guess, what is the word? You get the idea. And then you have the Khmer language and Thai language together formed a bilingual society in original Ayutthaya, just as we have Spanish and various other languages, of course, and English in the United States. And then finally we have Hindu religions and Theravada Buddhism making a religious society in Ayutthaya, as well as we obviously have a multi-religious society in the United States. One of the perspectives that I learned from this was just how impactful the Ayutthaya Empire was, and I'm surprised that I haven't heard of it up until this dialogue, and so I think we should take that up with the American education system.
I'm presenting on art within the Rattanakosin period, and I decided to really zoom in on an area that I found really interesting, which was puppetry during this time period. Next slide, please. So this is the Hunluang form of puppetry. It was the first puppet art form in Thailand, and it originated in the Ayutthaya period. The last historical performance was for the funeral of King Rama IV. This puppet is 1 meter tall and controlled by 22 strings. It differs very greatly from other string-controlled puppets in Europe at the time, which were controlled from the top. Instead, the strings are at the bottom, controlling all of the movements of the puppet, from like every single joint to the eyeballs. It's a very complex art form. It was used in a royal context. It was used to perform episodes of the Ramakien, which is the Thai version of the Ramayana story from ancient India. And it was used to perform this story for birthdays of the king, for court funerals, for royal weddings, and other such royal occasions. This art form was lost primarily due to its complexity, but it was revived starting in 2016 with the finding of a manuscript that detailed how to manipulate the puppets again. And it was performed once again in 2017 at the cremation of King Rama IX. Next slide, please. Another form of puppetry is Hun Krabuk. This was highly influenced by Chinese Hainanese puppetry at the time and originated during the reign of King Rama V. It incorporates Thai styles of art, specifically the costumes are inspired by the Khon dance performance. The puppet is held on a bamboo rod, and the puppeteers have control over the head, the hands, and the mouth. And they're much smaller than the Hunluang, about less than a foot tall typically. It was also used to tell the story of the Ramakien, but instead of being used for royal audiences, they were used for more popular everyday audiences. This also faded a lot as an art form, but has been revitalized through some universities starting to teach it. Next slide, please. This is the Hunlakon Lek puppets. They were also developed during the reign of King Rama V. The aesthetics have both Thai style and Chinese style. Here is the Chinese style puppets, and then here are the Thai aesthetic style puppets. The control mechanisms are very interesting as they use multiple puppeteers, usually 2 to 3, to control each puppet, and this was inspired by Japanese Baromek puppetry during this period. Puppeteers were sometimes behind a curtain and sometimes in front of the curtain, and when they were in front, the puppeteers would dance in time with the music that was playing, making this a very complex art form. And for the Chinese style, the Thai style puppets were again used to tell the Ramakien and other Thai legends, and the Chinese style puppets were specifically used to tell the romance of the three kingdoms, and they're still performed today for popular audiences. Next slide, please. So this is a very new puppetry form called Hun Kon, where some university students created it in the 2000s, and essentially the puppet, instead of being a puppet, is a human being hoisted up with other humans as the puppeteers controlling the puppet. It's specifically imitating the Khon dances, so merging these two ancient Thai art forms of puppetry and Khon. This could be considered similar to some Western forms of dance and art that we see today, with like trying to do the robot to mimic an inanimate object's motion. This is similarly like the dance is trying to mimic the motion of puppets with humans. This is also for popular audiences. Thank you.
Hi, so I'm presenting on the evolution of Thai architecture since the Ratanakosin era from 1782 to the present day. So architecture in itself is very interesting because it's an inherently harmonious endeavor. Not only does it harmonize materials used in construction or even land allocation and land use, it also calls for the harmony of the artist's beliefs and traditions with the architectural design. In the context of Thailand, this has taken the form of the influence of Buddhism in its many different forms. In the early Ratanakosin era, Theravada Buddhism predominated, and in fact, it's practically predominated since its introduction into the country in the 12th century. They hold the belief that life should be in the pursuit of wholesomeness, and when we depart from the human realm, the degree of wholesomeness that we have achieved governs which of the 6 realms we are then reincarnated into. And so, because of this, in the field of architecture, this primarily takes the form of pursuing wholesomeness at connotations of wholesomeness in peace, lightness, and floating. I don't know if you guys have seen in many of the temples that we visited, but they oftentimes take the form of take a very symmetrical form to sort of elicit equilibrium and connotations of peace. The lightness is often derived from the tiering of their roofs. That it's sort of like the perception is basically they want to break up the rigidity and stiffness of the rectangular roof. And last but not least, the floating is derived from the steep angle of many of the temples, the roofs of the temples. Beyond the predominant influence of Theravada Buddhism comes the subsidiary influence of Mahayana Buddhism, which, although they were introduced into Thailand at an earlier date, they have since been pushed into a sort of taken a backseat. But their influence still remains, and this has primarily taken the form of Bodhisattva's metaphorical boat. So take a look at this roof. There is somewhat of a curvature to the roof, and it's said that this curvature is a representation of Bodhisattva's boat and determination to bring all living creatures across the river of life before he eventually reaches Nirvana. Next slide, please. So, since the early Ratanakosin era, there has been a lot of globalization and a risk of cultural dilution. And this has in turn resulted in many people calling for cultural preservation. In its initial stages in Thailand, this actually caused a lot of conflict because they equated cultural preservation to cultural stagnation in the architectural sense. And ultimately, cultural stagnation completely contradicts the country's pursuit of development. This issue was eventually resolved when prominent architects like Wimolsit Horayan Gore basically argued that aspects of culture were dynamic in nature, and saying that they should stagnate completely defies like the whole premise of culture. And so what they were arguing was that our architectural design was an interpretation of culture, and interpretations with viewpoints of the population ultimately change with time, and sort of the designs and the interpretations and the depictions of cultural ideals could change and didn't necessarily have to stay in the same form that they did in the early Ratanakosin era. And so, next slide please. And so, in the present day, modern architects have tried to take this on, and it has resulted in their focalization of three main points: gabled roofs, which are basically two slopes that meet at a ridge, roof eaves, which are basically an overhang at the edge of the roofs, and freestanding pillars, which all culminate in their pursuit of connoting peace, lightness, and floating. So in these two examples, there's a clear difference in interpretation, and which is sort of my perspective into how this approach moving into the future could result in many problems, because down here is a park that was sort of architectured by public architects working with the government, and as you can see, it's a lot more open concept, and in comparison to private architects that have created a pretty dense and closed concept house that many.
Marcus?
Alright, hey everyone. Today I'm going to be talking about the history of science and technology in Thailand during the Ratanakosin time period. So it all began with this guy, King Rama IV, also known as King Mongkut. He was a really pro-Western king. He was born in 1804. He served as king from 1851 to 1868. So he embraced a ton of Western modernization, especially in science, geography, technology, education reform, all sorts of things. That was like his big thing. This was kind of the mark of the modernization of Thailand. So yeah, he embraced a lot of this stuff. One of the big examples of this is in Buddhist scripture. There's this thing called the Trepham, which is a geoastrological map of the Earth. And in this scripture, it states that essentially it's describing the Earth as flat rather than round. He was the first person to kind of say, you know, this isn't true, and Buddhist scripture should not be always taken literally in this sense. We should embrace modern Western science and go with what they say. So yeah, he was kind of a big influence there. He's considered the father of science and technology in Thailand because of a few of these things, and one of his big examples on the next slide here is the solar eclipse prediction. So Thailand was introduced to telescopes in 1608 when a bunch of Siamese ambassadors went to France to view some presentations and to make the first connection with the Western world. And then many decades later, they started building diplomatic relations, and the French gave them a lot of astronomical instruments to utilize. They ended up not really caring until Mongkut came around. Mongkut was actually a Buddhist monk for 27 years, and he studied a lot of astronomy and geography and science during that time. So he came along, and traditional beliefs were still very dominant until he came along, and he actually correctly predicted a solar eclipse on August 18th, 1868. He invited a bunch of Western officials to come and view it. So like, look at me, I know how to do this, and this is like, us, Thailand should really embrace this modern science, it's the way to go. He got it right. Kind of cemented his legacy as like the person who modernized Thailand in terms of science and educational reform. But actually, it ended up not really helping Thailand at all. Like, they didn't utilize it. They're not an astronomy country. You know, they're not known for their developments in that field. But they did make August 18th Thai National Science Day because of this, which is a pretty solid development for them. So some improvements after Mongkut. So he actually died 6 weeks after he predicted that solar eclipse from malaria that he got while he was on that journey. So after that, no one really cared so much anymore. Like, they still embraced the modernization of science from the Western world, but they weren't really innovators. They weren't really like prominent scientific explorers per se. So yeah, he died, and then there was really little momentum. As a lot of other people outside Thailand, was an exporter country, mainly with rice cultivation. And so they just followed innovations from other countries. So the Bowring Treaty, that was in 1855. That was essentially when Thailand opened to international trade and got rid of all the local government monopolies on trade and international business. So you'd think that that was like, okay, we're going to innovate, we're going to be local modernizers ourselves. But actually what it meant was that a lot of Chinese people and a lot of Westerners just came to Thailand and set up businesses and investment firms there, and you still utilize their international practices but in Thailand. So Thailand itself was still kind of a follower, utilizing other technologies from other countries that they had been using in past centuries, not necessarily creating their own innovation or being prominent in their own developments. However, they did have the Rangsit project of 1890, which was the first like Thai-owned actual agricultural development themselves. This wasn't necessarily new technology. This didn't promote any sort of crazy new irrigation system or anything like that, but it was their first development themselves of a comprehensive irrigation system 1,600-kilometer waterways, and also a lot of canals. Like a lot of other people talk about the canals in use. Like they had this infrastructure, but it was not their science or their technology. It was very much modernized by the West and by China. So science and tech today. So that was like 1800s, the late 1800s. From the 1900s onward, they actually had a lot of notable progressions in building science and tech institutions and organizations in Thailand. So here's a pretty non-exhaustive list, but you can see like this is all in the mid to late 1900s. That's when Thailand was really industrializing as well. So that kind of tracks. The first one's interesting. It's Bureau of Agricultural Science. This was formed in 1923. Just fun fact about that is their first experiment was, can they use hard liquor as crop pesticide? It did not work, but they did try it, which I think is pretty cool. So yeah, all of these notable progressions, all these institutions, and then how does that translate into modern day statistics? Here's a few quick stats on where they're at today in terms of R&D and patent pending and things like that, research and development related things. They currently spend 1.1% of GDP on their R&D, which is 37. This is, by the way, these are rankings taken from some International Institute for Management Development, and they take 63 of moderately relevant countries in the world and rank them based on that. So this is not 37th in the entire globe. This is 37th out of 63 moderately relevant countries. So yeah, 1% of GDP spent on R&D. That's up from, that's 2023. In 2017, I think it was 1%. So, I mean, you know, it's better. 40th in R&D personnel per capita, 54th patent applications, 49th in university education. So as you can see, very low. Like that makes sense. They're a developing country, and they still have a lot of work to do. But there's still like a lot of disparity between all these institutions, all these organizations being developed, and where it actually gets deployed in their statistics. So yeah, some quick final analysis. Wow, that's hard to read. There we go. So they have a lot of stagnancy in innovation and developments in science and tech. From what I researched, it's because they have consistent external adoption of science and technology rather than internal innovation. This hasn't been part of their culture in their recent history. Also, like I mentioned on the last slide, lack of growth in the R&D, which is attributable to lags in the government and economic efficiency in Thailand. Like I mentioned before, they're still a developing country, so there's a lot of work to be done on that side of things. But to end on a high note, there is a little bit of hope for the future. They sent their first military satellite into orbit in 2020. That was actually also assembled by a Dutch company, which is slightly ironic, but still good for them. The GISTA, I guess you can call it, which is the Geoinformatics Science and Technology Development Agency, started supporting local farmers to use satellite data to improve their crop utilization and to get better output from their crops in recent years. So that's a cool development on the agro-tech side of things. And then finally, Thailand is hoping in general to become the regional space hub for Southeast Asia. So if you go to the next slide, they actually have a master plan for this. And this is just one page of the master plan. It's a very long document. But you can see how thorough this is. They have a real strategy. So hopefully, this is from 2017 to 2036, they want to implement this master plan. So hopefully they'll get that done by 2036. And by that point, they'll be the space hub for regional Southeast Asia. Yeah, that's it.
Okay, I'm going to present on the intellectual history of the Ratanakosin era. So first, I'm going to give you guys a quick timeline of how ideologies evolved throughout this era and time period. First, in 1782, we find the founding of Bangkok by King Rama I, which kickstarted the Ratanakosin era. During this time period, monarchs of this period were still strong patrons of Theravada Buddhism, which is still promoted in the royal court and protected. In 1868, we see King Chulalongkorn streamline modernization, bringing some of his Western education in creating a Western framework for modern subjects such as engineering, medicine, and law. He also created systematic programs and some travel abroad programs for students to learn more about Western philosophies for Chulalongkorn University students. In 1934, there's a prevalent philosopher named Samak Buravas who merged materialistic and physicalist views from his experience in the UK with Buddhist philosophy, and from his learnings he started conversations of adapting Western philosophies into the traditional and indigenous Buddhist philosophies in Thailand. one of the major ideologies in Buddhism is pursuing the middle path. And this middle path ideology is integrated into many parts of Thai society. In the royal court, for example, the Dharma Raja concept influenced kings to govern with a middle path of wisdom and compassion, pursuing justness instead of tyranny or leniency. This is also what causes Thailand to have a unique dual identity with its adoption of Western philosophies and while still maintaining its indigenous Buddhist traditions. Within its own people, we see an exhibition of harmony and conflict, conflict avoidance, and this shows the social cohesion despite different backgrounds, which we know from the presence of a lot of Burmese people in Thailand. It's a bit difficult to compare, or it's a bit difficult to find similarities with the middle path philosophy with a lot of American cultures, because America has a greater emphasis on individual freedom, and also we see consumerism and materialism rampant in American society, which is a direct contrast of the middle path. But I think another familiar philosophy that we might be more familiar with is the yin and yang, which has a bigger emphasis on balance and harmony and pursuing a medium between two extremes. So, to share a bit of my ideas on this, I think that adopting the middle path philosophy reflects and echoes a lot of modern issues. Specifically in the context of this course, we can see a lot of environmental problems to be able to be solved using this middle ideal philosophy. It can be adapted to work-life balance and also answer a lot of the ideological polarization which is rampant in America. However, that being said, the middle path isn't always equally attainable. It definitely depends on one's life circumstances, such as their socioeconomic status or other life experiences, that may cause the middle path to be inaccessible or more accessible than others. And that's it. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to present on the history of the Britannicosin economy. So first, I just want to get a brief overview and see what people know about the period. I'm sure you've all played two truths and a lie. So 2 statements are true and 1 is a lie. The first one is the main export of the kingdom was rice. The government successfully maintained a monopoly over trade until World War I, and the kingdom formed 2 trade treaties with Britain. So if you think the first one is false, raise your hand. If you think the second one is false, raise your hand. I think the last one is false, raise your hand. Okay, and then see the answer. The second one was false. All got it wrong. Great, I can teach you a lot, I guess. So the early period of the Britannicosin period is what I will start with. This period was really important because the economy really developed in this period and it set the stage for later foundation. And previous wars really hurt productivity, and when it really recovered throughout this period, the economy was really able to grow. And in the early period, the economy was still subsistence level based, so a lot of the production was for individual consumption rather than for the markets. And the main exports were rice and sugar. And because of the sugar industry, a lot of Chinese-owned plantations came to Thailand, and China was the main trading partner starting from the late Ayutthaya period. And now I'm going to talk about the growth of trade. There was both domestic and international expansion of trade. We had a lot of investment from Chinese merchants, which really shows the influence that China had on Thailand during this time. And the royal warehouse was in charge of trade during this period and did restrict certain goods, such as rice, which was really important for the individual economy of Thailand, so they didn't really want to export as much rice. And they also inspected foreign ships, and they made them pay taxes based on the ship's size. And then a lot of these taxes went towards palaces, temples, and paying government officials. And the first treaty was the Barani Treaty in 1826 between the British East India Company and as I am. And this was because the British was really unsatisfied with the current state of trade with the kingdom, and they wanted free trade. And the consequence was growth of trade in the kingdom, and it ended up being beneficial towards them. However, it did end New World Trade monopoly. It granted rights to the British to trade throughout Bangkok, and the government collected taxes from British merchants, which again was a main source of revenue. And then the second treaty, which Marcus talked about a little bit, was the Bowring Treaty in 1855. This was sort of formed because Britain was still unhappy with trade, as there was still a lot of restrictions with what could be traded, specifically rice. It was very not willing to be traded, and they reduced this import tariff and lifted restrictions. So this really shows the Western influence that came to Thailand during this time, and it really liberalized the economy. It moved from this traditional subsistence level towards an export-oriented economy, and the top export soon became rice. And just a quick comparison with the U.S. During this time, it entered into similar trade treaties. In 1815, a trade treaty was formed with Britain, and then in 1833, the U.S. formed its first treaty with an East Asian nation, and called the Siamese-American Treaty. And just some personal insights, as a lot of people have already talked about this ability for Thailand to take on external influence but still maintain its own individual culture. I think this is shown with the economy and its ability to really form these concessions with the British, who wanted to really reform trade with Thailand, and it compromised and ended up being for the better and expanding the economy.
Just one quick announcement while Daniel goes there. Tomorrow we gather around at 8:30. Sorry, don't be late because tomorrow we're not going sightseeing, we are going at a flight and international flight. We're going all the way to Bangkok, so don't be late. And the other thing is, so 8:30 and send a message to the message over this order. It's a message. 8:30 and go clear the bills also. This evening, if you have any extra bills from the hotel, right, clear those bills.
So I'm going to be going over the societal history of Thailand in the Rattanakosin period.
Use the mic. Just speak loud.
In front of you.
Okay. I mean, so Thai society during the Rattanakosin period was hierarchical, with the king at the top of the social pyramid. Below the king were the nobility, consisting of high-ranking officials, aristocrats, and members of the royal family. Beneath them were commoners, including merchants, craftsmen, farmers, and laborers. Family has traditionally been central to Thai society. The extended family system, where several generations lived together in one household, was common during this period. Respect for elders and filial piety were important values. The role of women within the family was primarily centered around domestic duties and childbearing. However, women could also hold significant influence within the household and community. Buddhism, the predominant religion in Thailand, influenced various aspects of daily life, including rituals, festivals, and moral values. During the period, education was primarily reserved for the elite and the clergy. Traditional education focused on Buddhist teachings, literature, and royal customs. So they did have quite a bit of major developments throughout the period. They did experience their shift to democracy from absolute monarchy in 1932, and that brought around a lot of changes in various aspects of their society. So it gradually led to the erosion of traditional hierarchical structures. And as urbanization rose and the growth of the middle class, there was a lot more social mobility that challenged some of those more traditional social divisions. And there was also an emergence of civil society organizations, advocacy groups, and grassroots movements that contributed to a more pluralistic society with diverse voices and perspectives. So continuing on with that history, urbanization and modernization led to changes in family structures, with nuclear families becoming more common, particularly in the urban areas. Women's roles were also evolving with increasing educational and career opportunities leading to greater gender equality within families. And they also have become more active in the workforce and increasingly involved in decision-making processes within households. There was also a lot of globalization and exposure to Western culture that influenced the younger generation, leading to changes in lifestyle, fashion, and entertainment preferences. Additionally, the democratization of education resulted in increased access to schooling at all levels, leading to higher literacy rates and improved educational attainment among the population. However, it's important to note that disparities in access to quality education still exist, particularly between urban and rural areas and among socioeconomic groups. So some of those influencing forces that drove the changes during the time period were the political movements, such as the 1932 revolution and subsequent coups and political upheavals, economic policies including industrialization, urbanization, and integration into the global economy through trade and foreign investment, domestic education reforms, the large influence of tourism and cultural exchange through exposure to global cultures, and the Cold War alliance with the US and the founding of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, as well as technological advances such as the internet and infrastructure. And so my element of like personal perspective and analysis was that over the time period there is certainly a notable influence of global capitalism, generally stemming from the West. And you can see that that really promotes increased economic growth and output, but that sometimes came at the expense of certain traditions and of course the environment. So you obviously see a lot more of the nuclear families instead of extended families living together. So there are some cases when you can see that values were changed in the name of like external forces. And then the other thing that I thought was really fascinating to see in Bangkok particularly was the confluence of so many cultures and how Thai society has been very welcoming and adaptive to the diverse groups that habitate the region.
Going to send you a text anyway, but remember Indonesia is very strict about the fact that we are going there as students. What we do, Thailand is still somewhat open, but you never know, but Indonesia is very strict. So if you say something else, there is a very good chance that's how strict they are. So what we do among ourselves is not maybe their concern, but they want to know something, whether you are good or not. Maybe are you going to go out in their fields and try to change something? Are you going to write something about the system of government or things of that nature? Okay.
On that note, I researched the political history of the Ratanakosin period. The Ratanakosin period began in 1782 with the founding of the Chakri dynasty by King Rama I, not even 2 decades after the destruction of Ayutthaya. Rama I moved to the capital of Siam to Bangkok and built a grand palace. One of the most important parts of the Ratanakosin period was the Buddhist Reformation. This period saw the evolution of Theravada Buddhism in Thai society, spearheaded by King Rama IV, and King Rama V began the reform of the monastic community. The Thamayut Nikaya was a reformist monastic code that promoted freedom and autonomy, as well as legal recognition for monks. Rama IV was actually a Buddhist monk before he was king. Rama VI was known for his Western-influenced reforms. He was born in Bangkok in 1881 and was the king of Siam from 1910 to 1925. He was educated at Oxford, studying law and history, and served in the British Army. He introduced the Gregorian calendar to Thailand and reformed marriage laws, making monogamy the only legal type of marriage. He implemented universal smallpox vaccine and created the Thai Red Cross. And he also founded the first university in Siam in 1917, which is the Chulalongkorn University. Other significant reforms during this period included Rama V abolishing slavery, Rama VI making educational reforms, including compulsory education, and Rama VII, who converted the absolute monarchy to the present democratic system, which is a constitutional monarchy with the king as head of state. International relations during this period. Thailand established diplomatic and religious connections with other Theravada Buddhist countries, fostering monastic and scholarly collaborations with Burma, Sri Lanka, and Cambodia. Thailand managed to avoid colonialism by making deals and trading with Western invaders. Although Siam did lose some territory, it was never fully taken over. Rama IV established treaties with European powers, which helped modernize Thailand with social and economic reforms. So a comparison with the US from 1782 to the present, which is basically all of the United States' history. In terms of democracy, the US was established to be a democracy in 1776, while Thailand didn't become democratic until 1932. In regards to human rights, slavery was abolished in the US in 1865, but was not abolished in Siam until 1905. In World War II, Thailand was initially neutral, but was closely aligned with Japan and eventually declared war on the Allies in 1942. So the US and Thailand were at odds at that time. In regards to colonialism and imperialism, Thailand avoided complete colonization and was never an imperialist power during this time, while the US was founded as a colony and became an imperialist power. Thailand has very complex and extensive constitutional history. They've had 20 constitutions since 1932. Each one, I think, was preceded by a military coup. So the constitutional history of Thailand is characterized by a lot of power struggles where there would be a military coup and then these new leaders would want to legitimize themselves by writing new constitutions. The People's Constitution, which is one of the most notable ones, it's from 1997, and it was praised both domestically and internationally for its support of human rights and the shift from a representative democracy to a participatory democracy. The 2017 Constitution is the most recent, although there were some interim constitutions and other things in between. In the 2017 Constitution, the king has little direct power. He can veto legislation, although that is subject to an override by the parliament with a 2/3 vote. And he can dissolve the House of Representatives and call for elections. So the effects of Thailand's constitutional history, which is characterized by these violent coups, interim constitutions, revised constitutions, and general political upheaval, has led to political instability and the people really having a lack of confidence in their government. There have been economic impacts, such as the deterrent of foreign investment and tourism, and the polarization of politics. There's factions where there's the pro-democracy factions and the royalists or pro-military factions. My take on the need for stability: the Thai people would largely benefit from long-term political stability. I think there needs to be a system in place to democratically establish a constitution that works and protect against violent coups. Easier said than done. Throughout Thai history, the most progressive change came from the kings. Perhaps constitutional stability could come about if the king made it a priority, even if that meant sacrificing more royal power.
Okay. Hi everyone.
everybody. I get the pleasure of ending this last time period that we've all been waiting for. So this is Thai culture in the Ratanakosin period. So yeah, here's the culture. There are a lot of different elements of culture, so I'm just kind of giving a broad overview of the 4 that I picked out, so you guys can really understand kind of what it looked like from a broader perspective. One thing I want you guys to notice on this slide, but really throughout the presentation, is that kind of the theme of this time period was the blending of cultures during this time of globalization. So while they're coming in contact with all these new cultures, there's new immigrants. Like others have mentioned, Thailand did such a great job of kind of incorporating these cultures and taking what's best from them while still maintaining their own cultural presence. So in art, during this time period, traditional Thai art forms like mural painting, sculptures, and architecture flourished under royal patronage. And then while they were blending different Western artistic styles in, for food, Thai culture retained its distinct flavor profile, sweet, salty, spicy, umami, while absorbing influences from neighboring countries.